The house in question sits quietly at 380 San Vicente Boulevard, in the Pacific Palisades neighborhood of Los Angeles. It's a low-slung, mid-century modern home with clean lines and ocean air winding up from the cliffs below. Built in 1947 and remodeled in the late 60s, the home was once owned and briefly lived in by Janis Joplin, just before her death in 1970. In early 2023, a married couple from Seattle, Lena and Mark Whitmore, both in their early 40s, purchased the property for just over $4.1 million. Mark was a former music producer, recently retired after a mild stroke. Lena, a visual artist, had fallen in love with the house the moment she saw the listing. The bright, clear-story windows, the quiet garden, and the subtle echo of old Hollywood rebellion it held. They didn't know about Janis at first, not until after they'd moved in. The first signs were subtle. A faint smell of patchouli and cigarettes that would drift into their bedroom around 2:30 in the morning. The stereo in Mark's studio would switch on by itself, always playing music from the late 60s, often Big Brother and the Holding Company, or sometimes songs Mark didn't recognize, scratchy, live versions with static and crowd noise. Lena began to feel watched. When working in her garden studio out back, she often caught glimpses of someone inside the house through the wide windows, a figure with a big tangle of hair, silhouetted by golden light. At first, Mark suspected Lena was just projecting. His health issues had shaken both of them. But then came the voices. In March, Lena was in the kitchen making tea when she heard laughter, deep, raspy, unmistakably feminine. She froze, thinking someone had broken in. But the house was locked. The laughter faded into a cough and the clink of glass. She searched the house. Nothing. Mark began experiencing auditory hallucinations. He'd hear someone humming behind him in the hall. He recorded it once. When they played it back, it was quiet at first, then, unmistakably, a woman whispering, "It's just another piece of my heart." There was a door in the floor of the hallway linen closet, something the inspection hadn't covered. One morning, Lena noticed it was ajar. Dusty steps led down to a crawl space. Inside, she found a small metal trunk. It was full of old photographs, roach clips, a dried corsage, and a crumpled letter addressed to someone named Seth. The letter was signed with a lipstick kiss and the initials JJ. It was dated October 2nd, 1972, days before Janis was found dead at the Landmark Hotel. Lena took the letter out into the sunlight to read it. It said, "I'm not scared of going. I just don't want to go quiet. This house, it keeps things. I feel it. And if I don't come back, maybe a piece of me stays." That night, the house shook. Not a quake, not wind, just a trembling through the floorboards. Mark said it felt like someone had walked through the house and left a kind of silence behind them. They brought in a medium, not out of fear, but desperation. The woman walked through the house with incense and said quietly, "She's here. She never left. But she's not angry. She just wants to be remembered." Mark set up a small shrine in the living room. An old record player, candles, and a framed photo of Janis that Lena had found in the trunk. That night, they played Mercedes-Benz. The lights flickered once, gently, and the scent of patchouli filled the room again. But it felt peaceful this time. Since then, the house has been quieter. Not silent but warmer, like someone watching over them. Lena swears she still sees her sometimes, out in the garden, barefoot and smiling through the haze of morning light. One older neighbor, Dolores, who has lived next door since the 60s, said, "Janis didn't live there long, but she loved that house. I remember her parties. I remember the sound of her laugh from across the fence. I think some souls don't move on because they don't want to. I wouldn't either if I had a view like that." The days in Pacific Palisades were unusually warm for spring. It was late April, and the air had taken on a heavy, honeyed stillness that seemed to weigh on the house. Lena often found herself walking barefoot across the cool slate floors just to feel some kind of grounding. Since the night they played Mercedes-Benz on the old record player, the house had settled, yes, but not in a way that felt final. More like a long breath held between chords. Mark was recovering. His energy was returning slowly. Most mornings, he would sit on the back deck with his coffee, gazing out toward the faint glint of the ocean through the eucalyptus. The garden, long neglected, had begun to bloom again, not by their hands. Lena hadn't planted anything yet, but tiny pink flowers had sprouted in a crescent along the southern edge of the fence, in a pattern she didn't remember being there before. Once, she tried to dig one up gently to identify it, but the root resisted like it had been there for years. She didn't try again. The studio out back, a freestanding unit that had likely been a tool shed in another life, had become Lena's main retreat. She had lined the walls with her canvases, big, abstract swirls of motion and sound, her way of capturing emotions too large for words. But something odd had begun happening in her work. Without realizing it, she'd started using colors she never reached for. Electric blue, mustard yellow, deep lipstick red, and over, in the corners of the canvases, the suggestion of a face. Wild hair, heavy lids, full mouth. It wasn't until she stood back and looked at 4 paintings side by side that she realized. It was her, Janis. Not from photographs either. This was a presence, captured through Lena's own instinctive strokes. A woman half turned away, caught in motion, like she was walking through the painting and had just looked back. One night, while Mark was asleep, Lena wandered into the garden. It was just past midnight. The air was warm and thick, and the plants shimmered faintly with dew. She walked barefoot across the stepping stones toward the center, where a small birdbath stood, cracked but still upright. She'd left a candle there earlier in the day without lighting it, and to her surprise, the wick was glowing. It wasn't a full flame, just a coal-like shimmer at the center, steady, unnatural. She looked up. The back porch light was off, but the studio's window glowed faintly from within, though she hadn't been inside in hours. The sound of humming drifted through the air, not a voice, but the idea of one. A melodic vibration, rich and raw, floating without source. Lena stepped toward the studio. As she reached the door, she hesitated. The wood felt warm. From inside, the scent of clove cigarettes and lavender oil rolled out like a memory. She opened the door slowly. The studio was dark, but her easel light was on. One of her unfinished paintings, she could have sworn she hadn't touched it in weeks, was different now. The background had been filled in. A swirling mess of reds and purples surrounded a figure. A full-body outline of a woman facing away, walking into a spiral of color, her hand just visible at her side, holding something. A bottle. Southern Comfort. The label was unmistakable. Lena didn't move. She didn't breathe for a few seconds. Then she heard a whisper, not in her ear, but in her chest. Don't clean it up. Let it be messy. Let it burn. Her hand trembled. She stepped back, slowly shut the studio door, and stood in the garden for a long while, watching the candle at the birdbath finally fade to black. Mark didn't believe her at first. He had been on new blood pressure medication and was struggling to sleep through the night. He said the stress was making her too sensitive. But then the lights began to turn on in the hallway at random, and only ever between 2 o'clock and 3 a.m. One night, Mark stayed up with her, just to prove it was nothing. At exactly 2:42 a.m., the hallway dimmer light began to glow, not all at once, but like someone was walking toward it with a match. The dimmer turned itself up in slow, distinct increments. Mark sat on the couch, staring. His knuckles were white against his coffee mug. No one was there, but the smell of roses and liquor was unmistakable. Then came the laugh. That same laugh Lena had heard weeks before. A deep, raspy, open-throated sound, full of something between joy and defiance. And this time Mark heard it too. He looked at his wife. "She's still here," he said. "She never left." They began digging into the house's history. Through old property records, they confirmed that Janis had indeed signed a lease for the property in late 1969. But her time there was short, less than 9 months. Neighbors had once seen her stumbling up the walkway after shows. One even remembered hearing her sing from the rooftop. They found an old photo online. Janis on the front porch of their house, barefoot, a drink in her hand, flipping off the camera. The photo was grainy, but Lena could see the same curve of the tree out front, the same cracked tile by the doorstep. Janis had loved this house. It was the last place she ever called home. And maybe even now it still was. It began with the upstairs bedroom, the one they never used. The room overlooked the backyard and sat directly above the hallway closet with the trapdoor, the one where Lena had found the letter. They had kept the room empty, not out of design, but intuition. Mark had once suggested using it as a second office, but every time he stepped inside, he got an ache in the center of his chest, like pressure on his heart. "It's too bright," he said once. But not in a good way. During the day, sunlight blasted through its wide, west-facing window and cast long shadows from the tree outside onto the hardwood floor. But at night, the light that came in through that same window felt wrong. Cold. Grayer than moonlight. As if the glass didn't filter natural light, but something more clinical, like the room was being watched from outside by something waiting to be invited in. And then the voice came. It was a Tuesday night, midnight. The air conditioner was humming quietly, and Mark had finally managed to fall asleep without his sleeping pills. Lena, however, was wide awake. She was sitting at the kitchen table with her sketchbook and a glass of wine, barefoot, wearing one of Mark's old shirts. The light above her buzzed softly. That was when she heard it. A voice low, slow, feminine coming from upstairs. Not a whisper. Not a hallucination. A song. Not one she recognized immediately. Just fragments. "Try. Just a little bit harder." It drifted down the stairs like smoke. Not a recording. A voice in the room above. Live. Present. Raw. Lena rose slowly. She didn't breathe as she climbed the stairs. The wood creaked under her weight, one careful step at a time. She reached the landing and turned toward the empty bedroom. The door was open. The light inside was on, even though they always kept it off. And there she was. For the briefest moment, a silhouette. A woman with wild, untamed hair, bare feet, loose-fitting blouse. She stood at the far window, one hand braced against the glass, the other holding something Lena couldn't quite see. Then the light flickered once, and she was gone. The next morning, Mark found Lena sitting on the edge of the upstairs bed, the one they hadn't used in months. She had a strange look on her face. Not scared, not sad. Somewhere between mesmerized and lost. "There was someone here," she said softly, not looking at him. She sang. Mark didn't question it anymore. That night had changed things. He had felt it too, just in a different room. An electricity in the walls. The subtle tension of air that's been disturbed, like after a thunderclap. He sat beside her and took her hand. "I think she's choosing you," he whispered. That weekend, Lena started painting again, but not in her studio. She brought her canvas up to the empty bedroom. She didn't question why. The room had a different energy now. Not peaceful, but not hostile either. Like walking into a bar that had just emptied after a long night, music still echoing in the walls, ashtrays still warm, voices still suspended in the ceiling. Lena painted every day. Always the same woman. Always in motion. Not fully visible, never still. Sometimes just her mouth. Sometimes her hands. Sometimes her back, as though walking down a hall Lena couldn't see. On the 7th day, Lena finished a painting unlike the others. The canvas was almost entirely black, except for the bottom third, where a woman stood facing away from the viewer. She held a microphone in one hand. Her other arm was lifted high, palm wide open. Not waving, not reaching, just there, open to something. And directly above her, in faint white strokes so faint Lena didn't remember painting them, were words. "Freedom's just another word." Lena dropped her brush. That night, the party started. It was just after midnight when the music began. Not loud, just a low, bass-heavy rhythm, muffled as if coming from underground. Mark was in bed. Lena was brushing her teeth. At first, she thought it was someone's car stereo outside, but the sound was inside the walls. Then came laughter. Dozens of voices. Glasses clinking. A tambourine. Someone yelling something that sounded like, "Take it again from the top, Janis." Mark came into the hallway in his pajamas. "What the hell is that?" They followed the sound past the kitchen, past the living room, back toward the closet with the trapdoor. The handle was warm to the touch. The air around it smelled like sweat, whiskey, and gardenias. Lena opened it slowly. The stairs led down into a darkness so thick it felt like velvet. She started down, Mark behind her, holding a flashlight. But halfway down the stairs, the flashlight died. And from below came the unmistakable crash of a cymbal, followed by cheers and applause. Lena gripped Mark's hand. "Do you hear it?" she whispered. Mark nodded. "Yeah," he said. "I think she's having a show." The door behind them didn't close, but the air changed. The light above the closet dimmed slightly, like someone had turned down the volume on reality itself. And below, the sound of the show continued, echoes of a voice, laughter, music, a piano, a woman coughing and laughing all at once. They didn't go all the way down that night. They simply stood on the stairs, holding hands, listening. Because somehow they understood this wasn't a haunting in the traditional sense. It was a replay, a refusal to be forgotten, an echo of freedom, messiness, music, and madness that had soaked into the foundation of the house and kept playing, long after the singer had left the stage. The next day, the house was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that presses inward, not like peace, but like pause, as if something had been left unfinished, waiting to be picked up again. Lena didn't sleep that night after hearing the music in the basement. Neither did Mark. He stayed in the living room, sitting on the edge of the couch, flicking the same lighter open and closed without realizing it. Lena sat in the hallway just outside the upstairs room, her back against the wall, staring into the open door. Inside the room, the final painting stood untouched, still damp. The woman with her back turned, arm raised, surrounded by darkness. But there was something in the painting now that hadn't been there before. A glow at her fingertips, barely visible, like the ember of a dying cigarette or a single note held too long. Lena stared at it for hours. By morning, she knew what she had to do. They decided to open the trapdoor again. But this time they went prepared. Mark changed the batteries in the flashlight 3 times. He brought rope, not knowing why. Lena carried a small speaker and her phone loaded with every Janis Joplin live performance she could find. It wasn't superstition. It was instinct. The trapdoor creaked open like before. The air that rose from the space below was cold but not stale. It carried the scent of eucalyptus, dust, and something sweeter, rosewood and smoke. They descended slowly. The crawl space wasn't what they'd expected. It was deeper than it should have been. The dimensions didn't match the house. The space stretched wide and low, the ceiling brushing Mark's head as he ducked. Wooden beams crossed above, and dirt covered the floor, packed and dark. And then, at the far end of the crawl space, a wooden door. Not new, not even properly fitted. Just a door, nailed crudely to a frame that looked as though it had been added long after the house was built. The wood was cracked, splintered with age, and stained in places that looked like they had once been touched by water or fire. Lena stepped forward. Mark held her back for a moment. "Are we sure?" Lena nodded. "She wants us to finish it." The door wasn't locked. It opened with a soft pop, like a record lifting from a sleeve. Inside was a single, unfinished room. Concrete floor, a single chair, and a wall covered in something unexpected: photos, clippings, flyers, all pressed under plastic or stapled directly to the drywall. They stepped in together, the flashlight beam catching on glints of silver and faded colors. Posters from old shows. Headlines: Joplin on fire at Winterland. Queen of rock refuses to fade. Gone too soon. In the center of it all was a mirror cracked down the middle. A round makeup mirror mounted to the wall. Below it, a compact, an old lipstick tube, and a dried-up bottle of Southern Comfort turned on its side, the label yellowed and brittle. Lena felt dizzy. She turned to Mark and whispered, "This is where she got ready." This was hers. And then the light flickered. Not from the flashlight, the room's own light, a small overhead bulb that should not have had power. It blinked to life with a buzz, casting a dull yellow glow. The air shifted. From somewhere just behind them, a voice spoke. "You don't need to clean it up." They turned. Janis was there. She wasn't transparent. She wasn't floating. She was solid, real, her face half-shadowed, her eyes soft with exhaustion and a strange joy. She wore a long beaded vest over jeans, barefoot, her fingers stained with nicotine. Her hair, long and tangled, caught the low light like a halo of rust. She looked at them, then at the mirror, then at the wall of memories around her. "I thought they'd forget," she said. Her voice was low like gravel but not angry. "I left too quick." Lena couldn't move. Her eyes stung with tears. She reached out almost without thinking. But Janis stepped back. "You found it," she said. "The room, the show, the echo." Mark managed to speak. "What do you want us to do?" Janis smiled. Her teeth were crooked. Her lips were dry. "Let it play," she said. "Don't bury it." And then, without ceremony, she stepped toward the chair, sat down, and looked into the broken mirror. Her face began to fade in the reflection before her body did. First her shoulders disappeared, then her hair unraveled into shadow, and then, finally, her mouth. But before it vanished, it moved again. A whisper. "Freedom's just another word." And then she was gone. The light above clicked off. The room went cold. Mark and Lena stood in silence. The air was still. The show was over. They left the crawlspace together, not speaking until they'd shut the trapdoor behind them. Mark sat down on the hallway floor, his head in his hands. Lena stood by the window, her hand resting on the frame. The garden outside looked different. The flowers had bloomed overnight, every corner now thick with color. Pink, yellow, violet. A riot of wild growth that hadn't been there before. And in the center of the garden, just under the tree, the ground looked freshly disturbed. They never spoke about sealing the door again. They never tried to paint over the history of the house. Instead, they opened the upstairs room and turned it into a listening lounge. They placed her records there, her posters. Mark installed a proper sound system and built a shelf for vintage vinyl. Lena hung her final painting of the woman walking into the dark on the back wall. Visitors came sometimes. Friends, musicians, curious strangers who had heard rumors. Some would laugh, some would cry, and every now and then, just as someone put the needle down on a record and Piece of My Heart began to play, the hallway light would flicker, the air would grow warm, and the faintest smell of cigarettes and roses would drift through the house. Because she hadn't been haunting it. She had just been waiting for someone to finish the last note. And now the house sings with her. Every night. Softly. In echoes. Forever. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.